I'm Rich Blundell. I have a background in geology and ecology, and then I got the master's in philosophy of science and ended my academic career in a field called big history, which is essentially the story of the universe that includes humans. It's an emerging field. I guess I'm sort of exploring this idea if I might be an activist, but not the kind that sort of shows up and yells and all that. Although that's an important thing. I don't think I'm that kind of an activist. I'm more of a kind that creates media and things like that. One of the things that's been most prevalent is this initiative called Oika. It comes from the ancient Greek word oikos, probably many of you know. Essentially what we're trying to do here is to reach culture. The idea here is that if you take an issue like climate change, you can frame it as a problem of carbon, or you can frame it as a problem of culture. And if you frame it as a problem of culture, ultimately it's a problem of cognition. And so that's the arena in which Oika does its work. How do we change culture by changing the way humans think and perceive themselves, how they sense themselves as parts of the natural world? One of the primary principles of Oika is this idea that there's this ecological intelligence, that there is an intelligence to nature, and that it can be sensed by human beings. And so what Oika does is to use our skills of the apparatus that we use to make the world intelligible felt. And that's why this is often a job for artists. So you can see the connection there. It's about making that intelligence of nature felt. And that's a perfect job for artists. Another one is this idea of ontological continuity, which really just means that reality is on a continuum. And I take that incredibly seriously, that everything is connected to everything else. And that includes what we think of as the realm of imagination and thought and creativity. All of that is actually part of nature. It's all on one big continuity of nature. And so, as I mentioned, because if you think of these things as cognitive problems, that's why a lot of the science that we work with in Oika is cognitive science, understanding how human beings make sense of the world, not just ecological dynamics that you'll encounter out in the forest, but how those ecological dynamics can be expressed and manifest in the human dimension as part of that continuity. And that's another reason, a big part of this is how can that transform people? So how can it transform the artist who's out there? How can it transform the art that they create? And because I'm naive enough to think that artists still create culture, how can that transformation be carried through the artist into the art and into the culture? And so a lot of what I've been doing is a lot of public communication stuff. I do a lot of podcasts, create a lot of films, educational films. I've got small cohorts of artists pretty much all over the world, Greece, the UK, here in the US, create a lot of films, do some virtual reality stuff. And these are the ecological interpretations. So if you're interested, there's a lot of little films, like you can see the one we did for Hubbard Brook there with the experimental area sign. But there's many, many films that I've done just interpreting the work of artists through an ecological lens. I'm trying to also reach out to other realms and doing just a lot of talk with people out there on the internet who are heavy into cognitive science and philosophy. Someone turn over Rita now.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Rita Leduc. I focuses on systems and relationships. I was raised in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, which is where I started making art and where I started going outside. My first large body of work was paintings, where I was essentially chasing shadows. I would take large canvases outside with oil paint and try to scramble to chase these shadows, which was an impossible task, which was the point. Next, I guess while I was doing that, I was also a scenic designer working in theater, creating environments. So eventually I combined those two things where I became an installation artist, creating environments in response to environments. Finally, I found myself back outside, creating ecosystems of artwork in response to ecosystems of place. So my practice is a holistic connection to place. It requires a long-term, intimate relationship with that place. Basically, what I do is I have to take the whole apart in order to put it back together. So I zoom in on relationships between the parts. This can be blades of grass, rocks, or the urban landscape. What I'm trying to do is capture the qualia of a place, physical, phenomenological, and sensorial. So I use a variety of materials and techniques in order to let in, collect, and express out, interpret. I'm using myself as a sensor when I do this. My body is porous. I have synesthesia. I think this is part of it, but I've just always kind of felt like my body is a porous membrane. Everything comes in, everything goes out. So I do that when I go on site. I'll spend a lot of time on site outside, and then I let it all in, bring it back to the studio, express it out. So this practice of letting in and expressing out perforates boundaries between the parts, including myself. So that collection and interpretation eventually becomes indistinguishable, and it builds the whole back into view. The sensor of myself extends into the sensor of the place. We become one. In doing this, as it's brought back into view, I get glimpses of a relational intelligence. This propels forward specific conversations that are constructed from a relationship to each specific place. So this is an ecosystem of work collected from Tofty Lake in the boundary waters of Minnesota. All right, so ecology extended, what is that? That is what Rich and I are doing here at Hubbard Brook. So far, it's our experiment in which we intertwine our personal expressions of Oika. We gather ecological intelligence from Hubbard Brook. We're using all available sensors here. So we're using the sensor of the forest. We are using the instruments that the scientists have put out to collect the data, and we're using the sensors of ourselves. And then we want to extend it outward into culture.
So I'll just quickly go over this. This is just sort of a framework that we've been working with, and it's not supposed to be all-inclusive or exhaustive, and it's certainly not supposed to be hierarchical, but it's just a way of thinking about the different ways in which artists and scientists can collaborate. So, the lines in between are dashed to indicate that there's a lot of crossover and there's a lot of bleeding between the things. And as I'm listening to people talk, I'm really excited to hear how the work I'm hearing about maps into this. But anyway, you can think about, the basic thing to call in artists to make the data pretty. That's sort of one thing that they can do, and that's really important. All of these are really important. Teaching STEAM, and educating a workforce of scientists and engineers. Another one that's really important is enhancing critical thinking skills. I mean, look at our culture today. I mean, we kind of failed at that one. But and then there's also art actually participating, which I'm seeing a lot of, which is really exciting, in the scientific process. And then one we got from Lindsay, which was really cool, is how can we make an audience feel like what scientists feel when they discover something new, or just the curiosity factor? Can we cultivate that through art into like the audience? And then we're putting in this little thing I call the sublimation layer, which kind of indicates that there's something categorically different about what I think we're trying to do with Oika. So instead of just saying, we want to do this kind of work to get people to think about science and to think about nature and to feel more connected to it, we're doing that explicitly. Like we're actually putting that front and center with this work. And a lot of that happens on the periphery of the work. So I've heard several people already today just talk about how the art gives them a way in to talk about the science and that kind of thing. And so basically the outermost layer should really cultivate an earth-centric culture. Again, this gets back to solving big ecological, not just ecological, but sociological, economic, and political problems out there at the cultural level. Yeah, I forget this was.
So I knew you would. So thus far, we've walked through, across, and around the entirety of the experimental forest, visiting science sites, but also finding our own kind of sacred spots. We have baseline checks with the forest as often as we can, and we maintain that relationship. So far, the work is incorporating Hubbard Brook's wares, the ice storm experiment, and various locations along the brook. We've got, that's the gorge. I think they're both the gorge. So the work is investigating continuity, reciprocity, inaction. This is a sneak peek that's in progress, and tipping points.
And what?
Tipping points.
And this is just some images of some of the stuff that we're doing right now. A lot of workshops and creating a film, and a lot of school type things.
Okay, thank you.